Welcome to your deep dive. Today, we're going to be diving into the global economy.
Okay.
And get this, we're going to be exploring a theory that compares it to, wait for it,
Okay.
a Ponzi scheme.
Wow.
Yeah, you heard that right?
A Ponzi scheme.
But before you start stashing cash under your mattress,
Right.
we've got expert speaker here to help us kind of unpack all of this.
Yeah.
Based on the documentary that you sent over, the global economy is a pyramid scheme. End of the road.
Yeah, it's a very provocative claim. To even begin to grasp it, we need to lay some groundwork.
Oh,
Think back to those true crime documentaries you probably binged. Remember how Ponzi schemes always start small and then they just snowball?
totally. It's all about promising these ridiculously high returns, right?
Exactly.
And they use money from the new investors to pay off the older ones,
Right.
creating this illusion of success.
Precisely.
Yeah.
But like a house of cards, the whole thing collapses when that new money dries up.
Right.
And that's the unsettling parallel the documentary draws with the global economy.
Yeah.
It argues that the 1971 Nixon shock, when the U.S. dollar was unpegged from gold,
Yeah.
that kind of set the stage for this whole system.
Okay, so back then, the dollar was basically as good as gold.
Yeah.
$35 an ounce, boom, tangible value.
Yeah.
But when that link was broken,
Yeah, we entered the era of fiat currency.
right?
The dollar, and subsequently most global currencies,
Yeah.
became backed by nothing more than, well, trust. Trust in the government, trust in the system.
Which sounds kind of flimsy when you put it that way.
And that's precisely the point the documentary makes.
Yeah.
It argues that this shift to fiat currency opened the floodgates for governments to essentially print money at will,
Yeah.
leading to the kind of debt-fueled system we see today.
Okay, so explain this to me like I'm 5.
Okay.
Because I'm starting to feel a little lost here.
Okay.
How does this actually play out?
Imagine the U.S. government needs cash. It goes to the Federal Reserve and says, hey, we need to borrow some money.
Okay.
Now, instead of the Fed having to have that money on hand, they can just create it. And in return, the government gives them a government bond,
Okay.
which is essentially a fancy IOU.
And these bonds are then sold to, well, everyone, right?
Right.
Other countries, big banks, even regular folks like our listeners.
That's right. U.S. bonds are considered very safe.
Yeah.
So they're attractive investments globally.
Yeah.
But here's where the potential Ponzi scheme element comes in.
Okay.
A good chunk of the money made from selling these new bonds
Yeah.
is used to pay off old bonds, plus the interest that's piled up.
So new debt is constantly being created to pay off old debt, and the interest just keeps growing.
Pretty much.
That sounds unsustainable.
And that's precisely the comparison the documentary is making.
Yeah.
It's this idea that the system needs a constant influx of new money to keep afloat, just like a Ponzi scheme.
Right.
But there's another layer to this. And it's something that directly impacts everyone listening,
Okay.
the U.S. trade deficit.
Yes. The fact that the U.S. buys way more from other countries than it sells to them.
Exactly. We're sending tons of dollars overseas to pay for those goods and services.
Yeah.
But those dollars don't just vanish.
Where do they go?
They often flow right back into the U.S. economy, mainly through investments, you guessed it, in U.S. government bonds.
Oh, wow.
So it's this fascinating loop that keeps the system churning,
Yeah.
but it also raises some serious questions about its long-term stability.
Okay, so we've got this system built on debt and trust. How does this actually impact someone's daily life?
Right.
What does this mean for our listener out there
Yeah.
trying to make ends meet? I mean, this can't all be just theoretical, right?
It's definitely not just theoretical.
Yeah.
Remember those good old days everyone talks about?
Yeah.
When a candy bar cost a dime and a gallon of gas was a quarter?
Yeah, those stories make you want to cry.
And that's the sneaky thing about inflation.
Wow.
It's this erosion of your purchasing power.
Right.
Because currency is constantly being devalued.
Right.
The more money that's printed, the less each dollar is actually worth.
Yeah.
It's like diluting a strong juice with water.
Oh,
The more you dilute it, the weaker the flavor.
Yeah.
Right.
Which explains why so many families now need 2 incomes to even keep up with the cost of living compared to a single earner a generation ago.
Right.
It's like everyone's running faster just to stay in the same place.
The documentary argues that this very shift from saving to spending to, for many, racking up debt
Yeah.
is a direct consequence of this system.
Okay.
As the value of money shrinks, we're encouraged to spend it before it loses even more value,
Yeah.
which can create a vicious cycle.
It's bleak, but it does ring true.
Yeah.
Rising costs, wages that don't keep up. It's like a constant uphill battle.
Yeah. But hang on, I'm remembering another point the documentary made that seemed especially sneaky.
Okay.
It had to do with this idea of, what was it, core inflation?
Yes, core inflation.
Yeah. It's a measure of inflation that conveniently leaves out some pretty big expenses, food and energy.
So basically it's like saying, ignore the sky-high prices at the grocery store and the gas station. Everything else is totally fine.
Precisely.
I mean, who doesn't need food and energy?
Exactly.
Yeah.
The documentary throws out a pretty jarring statistic. If the U.S. used the same method to calculate inflation as we did back in the 1970s,
Yeah.
the current rate would be closer to 9–10%.
Wow, that's way higher than the official numbers we hear.
Yeah.
Talk about a reality check.
And it highlights this potential disconnect between what's being reported and what people are actually experiencing.
This whole system, as you're describing it, sounds designed to benefit, well, not the average person.
It definitely raises some questions about fairness.
Yeah.
And this is just the tip of the iceberg.
Oh, no.
The documentary goes even deeper, exploring the global implications of this system.
Yeah.
And how it might be pushing countries into a race to the bottom.
Hold that thought. We'll unpack those global implications and dive into the wild world of gold in just a bit.
Okay.
Don't go anywhere. Listener name, things are about to get even more interesting. All right, listener. We just left off talking about how this system might not be the most equitable.
Right.
But the documentary doesn't stop there.
Yeah.
It takes us straight into the belly of the beast with the 2008 financial crisis.
Oh, yeah.
Remember that?
How could anyone forget?
Right.
It's like the whole financial world was holding its breath, wondering if everything was about to just implode.
Exactly. And the documentary makes this bold claim. It argues that the crisis wasn't just some random event,
Right.
but rather a symptom of this whole system we've been discussing, reaching its breaking point.
It's like a stress test, right?
Yeah.
You just keep pushing and pushing and pushing, and eventually something's got to give.
Right.
And the documentary points to all the ingredients that were brewing in the lead up to the crisis. Mountainous debt, reckless lending practices, those crazy, complex financial products nobody really understood.
Those infamous derivatives.
Right.
They sound like something out of a science fiction movie.
Right.
Yeah.
It all added up to this incredibly fragile system.
Yeah.
And when that foundation crumbled, well, we saw the fallout firsthand.
Yeah.
But here's where the documentary gets really interesting.
Okay.
It argues that the bailouts and the stimulus packages that came after the crisis,
Yeah.
while seemingly necessary at the time, didn't actually fix the problem.
So they just delayed the inevitable, kick the can down the road, so to speak.
That's the argument. By pumping trillions of dollars into the system,
Yep.
governments and central banks might have averted a total meltdown,
Right.
but they also potentially exacerbated the underlying issues.
Mm.
It's like treating a serious infection with painkillers.
Okay.
You might feel better temporarily, but the root cause is still there.
And you know what? That analogy makes a ton of sense.
Mm-hmm.
It does feel like we've been in this constant cycle of crisis, bailout, temporary relief, then repeat. It's exhausting.
Yeah, and the documentary suggests it's not sustainable in the long run.
Right.
Sooner or later, we might have to face the music and actually deal with the underlying problems head on.
Which leads us to this other fascinating thread the documentary explores.
Okay.
Gold.
Oh, yeah.
They paint it as this potential life raft in a sea of economic turmoil,
Right.
a safe haven from all the fiat currency craziness.
Gold has always had this allure, right?
Yeah.
This tangible asset that holds its value over time.
Yeah.
Sort of hedge against inflation and the whims of governments.
But the documentary takes it a step further.
Okay.
They're suggesting that the price of gold has been deliberately suppressed.
Really?
Wait, people are actually doing that?
It's a controversial claim, but the documentary does present some evidence.
Okay.
They point to actions taken by central banks.
Okay.
Particularly in the late 90s and early 2000s, when many countries decided to sell off huge chunks of their gold reserves.
And their argument is that this was done to prop up the U.S. dollar as the global reserve currency.
Yeah.
Because a rising gold price would basically signal a lack of confidence in the dollar. Is that what they're saying?
That's the gist of it.
Okay.
The documentary goes into various methods that they allege are being used to manipulate the gold market.
Okay.
We're talking central bank sales, leasing gold to bullion banks, even potential accounting shenanigans.
It all sounds very cloak and dagger.
Yeah.
Like something out of a spy thriller.
Right.
Yeah. But why go through all that trouble?
Right.
What makes gold such a threat to the status quo?
The documentary argues that gold empowers individuals.
Right.
It gives you something tangible, something outside the control of governments and central banks. It's a way to protect yourself against reckless monetary policies.
So it's like a check on government power, almost.
Yeah.
Because with gold, they can't just print more of it.
Exactly. It's a finite resource.
Right.
So it's less prone to manipulation or its value.
Yeah.
At least that's the theory.
It's pretty wild to think about.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's play devil's advocate for a second.
Okay.
Let's say this documentary is onto something.
Right.
That this system is as precarious as they claim.
Yeah.
What can the average person actually do?
Well, the documentary suggests diversifying your investments.
Okay.
Instead of keeping all your eggs in the fiat currency basket,
Yeah.
consider putting some into tangible assets like, you guessed it, gold.
So move away from paper money and put your faith in something with real intrinsic value.
It's an interesting concept, for sure.
It is. It is.
But it's not just about gold. The documentary also emphasizes financial literacy.
Okay.
Educate yourself, understand the forces at play in the global economy,
Yeah.
make informed decisions about your financial well-being.
Right.
Knowledge is power, especially when it comes to your money.
It's a call to action, isn't it?
Yeah.
To take control of your financial destiny. This deep dive has been pretty eye-opening so far.
It has.
But before we wrap things up, there's one more piece of the puzzle we need to explore.
Oh, wow.
How this system is playing out on a global scale.
Right, because the documentary suggests that the effects of the system go far beyond U.S. borders. It's a global story, and everyone's a part of it.
Okay. Listener name, get ready for the final chapter of our deep dive.
All right.
We're about to go global.
Okay, we've talked about how this system works domestically, but as we were saying, the documentary suggests it's not just a U.S. issue.
Right.
It's a global phenomenon.
It is. Think of it like a giant game of economic Jenga. You know, all these countries are interconnected.
Yeah.
Their economies stacked precariously on top of each other.
So what happens when one block gets pulled out? Everything
Yeah.
starts to wobble.
Exactly. And the documentary argues that this system, with its emphasis on constant growth
Yeah.
and ever-increasing debt,
Right.
puts immense pressure on countries to stay competitive.
So it's a race to the bottom. In a sense, yes, the documentary highlights how countries often resort to devaluing their own currencies to gain an edge in global trade.
Okay, wait. Why would they do that? Wouldn't that hurt their own economy?
It's a double-edged sword.
Okay.
On one hand, a weaker currency makes your exports cheaper.
Right.
So other countries are more likely to buy your stuff.
Yeah.
But on the flip side, it makes imports more expensive for your own citizens.
So it's like a trade-off. Boost your exports, but make it harder for your people to buy things from abroad.
Exactly. And this is where the documentary argues that this system can really start to unravel. It can lead to a situation where countries are constantly trying to undercut each other,
Right.
often at the expense of their own workers and industries.
I'm starting to see how this all connects back to those feelings of frustration and anxiety that so many people feel about the economy, the job insecurity, the rising costs, just this sense that something is fundamentally broken.
The documentary draws a direct line between those personal experiences and the flaws that it sees in this global economic system.
So, listener name, what do you make of all of this? Is the global economy teetering on the brink of collapse like this documentary suggests, or are we all just being a little paranoid? We've given you a lot to think about today. One last thing. The documentary seems to suggest that individuals can protect themselves by investing in tangible assets like gold.
Right.
Is that something that you've considered?
It's a personal decision and one that requires careful consideration.
Yeah.
It's crucial to do your research, maybe consult with a financial advisor, and really understand the risks and potential benefits before making any big moves.
This deep dive has been quite a journey, hasn't it? We've gone from Ponzi schemes to gold, from the Nixon shock to the 2008 crisis. It's a complex topic with high stakes, and we encourage you to keep exploring. Your deep dive ends here, but the conversation doesn't have to. Keep questioning, keep learning, and keep thinking critically about the world around you.